First of all, I think your analysis was very straight line. History doesn't run in a straight line.
Kid, you cannot tell your neighbor he is stealing ducks when you are stealing funds.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go down that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they were talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD.
I got that.
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Come on, Lou Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but
okay,
an
he's good.
erratic
Mikhail
detective is Mikhail Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? Look, girl, how you deal with that? You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
Kingdom, you apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. Hi there, welcome to the Freddie Kissoon Show. Thanks for being with us. We hope you have a pleasant Wednesday evening, and after this show runs into the wee hours of Wednesday, you will have a blessed night and an enjoyable night. There are Guyanese, hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them, who have left these shows and have done exceedingly well in a global context, meaning that they have not done exceedingly well for themselves, but they have done very, very well, comparatively speaking, in the countries they have lived in. They have excelled in their particular areas in the country in which they live. One of Guyana's outstanding international journalists excelled in his adopted country, Canada, and became one of the most awarded, one of the most honored journalists in Canada, not only in Ontario, not only in one of the provinces of Canada, but in the whole of Canada, because he worked at the leading media institution in Canada, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. He spent 35 years there as a journalist. And if you see this man, curriculum vitae, it's longer than the Essequibo River. He has covered some sensitive and explosive global spots. The war in Serbia, the prisoners of Guantanamo. He interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu. And that guy has decided after 35 years that he will come back to his home and share his experience in professional journalism. And Guyana is better off than having these people with their tremendous experience. Our guest this evening is former investigative journalist with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Nazim Baksh, and he will take us through his 35 years journey. And I know you're expecting to hear what he has to say about Guantanamo, about interviewing a man who has now been characterized by the World Court as a war criminal. And of course, there's a sad situation in Bosnia, a little mini Holocaust there. So Nazim Baksh is our guest this evening, and he'll take you through 1 hour of his experience of being one of Canada's leading journalists. Nazim, it's nice to have you. The last time, twice we've had you, you talked about genocide in Gaza, the thing about the Palestinians. Let's take us, the viewers, through your journey as a Guyanese journalist working in the leading news media in Canada. I was in Canada, and I tell you what, I studied in Canada for 5 years, and during that time, everybody looked at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation television programs. Let's start with how did this thing come about?
Well, I left Guyana. Thank you very much, Freddie, for having me on the show. I left Guyana in 1980 at a time when Guyana was going through a very difficult period. 1980.
Full swing with Burnham.
Full swing with Burnham, and the assassination of Dr. Walter Rodney had taken place. It has been a short while after the unfortunate massacre that took place at Jonestown. And so coming to Canada as a young man in my teens, I was looking for what kind of career did I want to do? What did I want to do with my life? In Canada, a lot of opportunities presented themselves. And I decided very early that I wanted to be a journalist. Obviously, growing up in Guyana, I never had a television, right? So I never thought I could be.
Yeah, you left before we had television.
Exactly. So I didn't know the ins and outs of how to produce a television story. So I thought I'd become a print journalist. And so I went to university. I did my undergraduate work at York University. And then I went to Western University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. We have a London in Ontario. And I did my master's degree in journalism there. And I got hired at the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, in 1990, May 1990. Very fortunate at that time to start my career at that moment. The summer of 1990, I don't know if you remember or our viewers remember, but Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. And sparked off a set of crises and events that led ultimately to the first Gulf War between the United States and its allies against Saddam Hussein, and drove him out of Kuwait, but also led to a partial invasion of Iraq at that time. Also, that happened in 1990, a month before Saddam's invasion of Iraq, was a coup d'etat in Trinidad, led by a group called Jamaat al-Muslimin. A fellow by the name of Yassin Abu Bakr was the leader. He's now passed away. He's now died. But his group, 114 men, took over the parliament, took over the police station, and staged a coup. Literally, for 6 days, they held the prime minister hostage, shot him in the leg. And Yassin had lived in Canada. In fact, what is surprising, as I knew him, I did not know he also worked at the CBC as a stagehand for a certain period of time in the 1970s. But he had gone back, he had converted to Islam in Toronto, and it was the first coup d'etat in the Western Hemisphere that was led by an Islamist group that believed in jihad to bring about social revolution or social change. So this happened in Trinidad. It just so happened that I came into the CBC right at that time, this nexus of having understanding of the Arabic language, being able to speak it in sort of a small way, but enough to navigate myself and navigate my way around names and events and people and things like that. So I joined the CBC at a critical time. One of the few Muslims, in fact, I would say probably the only Muslim that I knew at the CBC, the national broadcaster at that time. There might have been others with different positions, but I came into the editorial, into the busiest newsroom in the entire country at the CBC, in television, particularly because we are obviously television and radio. We don't have print. Now we have digital, obviously. So that was a very, very critical time to join the corporation, join the media at that particular juncture. For me, exciting, young man looking to make a name for myself.
Well, when I read your CV, we're not going to get through all that you did within an hour because you've covered a lot of things. Which is the big one that you started out with? Which is the one that was the one that is the beginning of the global investigation?
Well, in 1990, there was several things that are happening in the realm of international terrorism. A fellow by the name of El Sayed Nusayr had just murdered Mir Kahani in a hotel lobby in Manhattan. Mir Kahani was an extremist settler, Israeli settler. He ran an organization called Kach. And Mir Kahani, El Sayed Nusayr was an Egyptian who had fought in Afghanistan. And he walked into the lobby and shot the man and tried to run away, but he got captured. And when they searched his apartment, they found a stash of Arabic written material, but they never translated it. Ultimately, what if they had clued in on what was going on? The aftermath of the war in Afghanistan, when the Mujahideen fought against the Russians, kicked the Russians out of Afghanistan. In 1989, the Russians left. The Mujahideen started to fight among themselves. The Arabs who had come to Afghanistan, by conservative estimates, there were 60,000 Arabs that came to Afghanistan to fight against the Russians with the Mujahideen, right? And so these people started to go back to their countries. Many of them came to the United States and several other countries, Western countries, Canada, Western European countries. And they had assembled in New York and began plotting an attack against the United States from within. That led to the first World Trade Center bombing, the first one, not the second World Trade Center bombing, the first World Trade Center bombing. And so once that happened, very shortly into my career, I got assigned to that story. And that became a pivotal turning point in my career as a journalist. To be assigned, first of all, to the Gulf War. I worked on the first Gulf War. So for about a year or so, that was my story. And then the World Trade Center was bombed. It never collapsed. The bomb went down 10 feet. Right, it did not explode up, and it did not. It shook the building, but it did not destroy the building. The building was ultimately repaired, and that set off a manhunt for the person who was responsible for it. But because of the Gulf War, the war in Afghanistan, the World Trade Center attack, I became a pivotal person in the CBC assigned to national security, and so I was the go-to person. Anything having to do with extremism, with terrorism, with the Middle East, with national security, and then human security became a part of that portfolio. But for 30 years, for 3 decades, that was my beat.
National security, international
terrorism, and so on.
International wars.
Exactly.
So the board or your management had faith in you to give you these assignments, and it never stopped, because from your CV, you went to Serbia, you went to Guantanamo.
Yes. So in the 1990s, the Yugoslavia broke up, right? Disintegrated. And so you have Croatia against Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina against Serbia, right? And these territories breaking away from Serbia, from Yugoslavia, became at war, right? And so I was assigned to work on that story because I guess it wasn't terrorism necessarily, but interestingly, remember I said about the Arabs who were fighting in Afghanistan? Many of them went to fight in Bosnia, right?
Because Bosnia is a Muslim state, right?
Well, because yes, majority Muslim, Bosnia-Herzegovina. And so they were outside of Sarajevo. There's a small place, and I can't remember the name of it, but many of them ended up settling in that place. And it's basically for Arab ex-Mujahideen from Afghanistan settling in that place. And they're still there. Many of them intermarried local women, and they were given citizenship, and they're in Bosnia. But at that time, a lot of this stuff was happening. So I was assigned to the story, and I worked on many small little stories, not documentaries, but small stories having to do with the war in Serbia and Bosnia, particularly those, but Croatia was also involved in it. And when and then there was a cessation of fighting, and then it resumed again in 1994. Between those years of war, over 100,000 people were killed in Bosnia in that one conflagration. Srebrenica happened. That was 10,000 in one day.
Yeah.
And I remember working on that story and being assigned to it. And I mean, it was a horrendous massacre that took place in that. Being a Muslim, being identified as a Muslim, and putting me in a situation where I am front and center on situations like that, it adds another dimension, another layer of stress, and another layer of anxiety, another layer of difficulty in navigating those stories. And so, but being forced to be a journalist, you have to be balanced. And you know, my balance is having to go and interview someone, a Serbian family that might have someone who died in the war back in former Yugoslavia in the territories, and having to be balanced and fair in those interviews with Serbs, for example, and when you're sitting with Muslim families, to be balanced and fair with them as well, to tell a balanced story, right? And so you learn very early. You can imagine in the 1990s, I was still a young journalist. I'm still in my 20s, right? And I don't have a lot of experience. My first trip to Afghanistan was in 1993. 1993, I land in Afghanistan, and literally there's a war going on. And the plane comes into Kabul over the mountains, and it gets dark very quickly. And it lands, because Kabul is in a valley, it's surrounded by mountains. And it lands on the tarmac, and literally the plane is navigating its way around bombed out planes on the tarmac.
And you're in that plane.
And we're looking at this plane, I'm looking out and wondering, where did I land? This is 3 years into my career. I'm in Afghanistan. And there was the prime minister was Hikmatyar, and the president was Dr. Rabbani. Sibghatullah Mujaddidi was the prime, or Rabbani. One of them was the prime minister. And the prime minister was Hikmatyar, and the president, was in Kabul, but they were fighting each other. And so we are in the crossfire of a fight that is going on. And one of the first big interviews I did was with Hikmatyar, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, who was one of the 7 top Mujahideen fighters against the Russians. And he got the bulk of American funding, bulk of American military aid. But now they're fighting for power.
I know, he's very anti-American now.
Very anti-American, yes. But at that time, they are fighting now for control of Kabul. So you got the faction with the Lion of the Panjshir, as they used to call him, who died right before 9/11 in the north. And you have Hikmatyar. And so we go to interview Hikmatyar, and that was one of the big interviews that I got, because he doesn't really do interviews.
Yeah, he was huge.
He was huge. Yeah, he was huge. But he's a recluse. He doesn't talk to people. And my assignment on the trip was to get Hikmatyar to speak. We got him eventually, and there's all kinds of funny stories, Freddie, that, sometimes when I bring these things up, it's hilarious. I look back at it, but it was scary at that time. So we were with him, and I hadn't talked to my wife or my CBC headquarters in 2 weeks. And so I saw him have a satellite phone on his desk, and I asked to use it. And I calculated the time it would be in Toronto, which would be at 5 o'clock. And I knew I couldn't call our boss at that time to say that we were safe when we were in Kabul and so on. So I asked to use the phone, and he hesitated for a moment and let me use the phone. What I didn't know then, but now knew later, was that a satellite phone could give away your GPS coordinates, right? And by turning it on, you literally, if someone knows that number, they'll know that phone is on, that person who's using the phone is a target. And Hikmatyar was a target. And so I turned the phone on, I called my wife and so on and so forth. It was safe, it was okay, nothing happened. But on the way back from Charasyab, which is about, they said 30 minutes, but it's literally an hour and a half back to Kabul, where we were staying, our vehicle was stopped. We were in two separate vehicles. My vehicle was stopped. I was accused of being an Indian spy. A gun was put to my chest. I was ordered, to tell the truth, literally. And our translator was saying, he's a journalist from Canada, journaliste Canada. And that wasn't working. So I said in English, I'm a Muslim. And the guy there was a bunch of them, and he was really aggressive. And he said, recite the kalima, right? And I knew instinctively that he wasn't asking me to recite the short formula that I'm a Muslim, but the long formula in Arabic. So I did. I recited it in Arabic, and he was so happy. He wanted me to have tea. They pulled me over in a corner. You must stay with that. And the bombs are going off in the middle of the night, in the sky, in the dark sky, because it gets dark very quickly. And every time a bomb goes off, like you see this thing go across the sky, right? And I'm like shivering. Literally, it's winter, it's December in Kabul, it's cold, and these guys wanted me to have tea with them. And so we begged and kind of said, no, we can't do that now. We need to get back to our hotel. It's safer there. There was no hotel. It's like a bombed out shell of a place where we stayed. So when you talk about the big story, the pivotal moment for me in my career, that was it.
Yeah, right? Because that guy is he still alive?
Who, Hekmatyar?
Yeah.
Yes, he's still alive.
Yeah. He's an icon in Afghanistan.
I've made about 4 or 5 trips to Afghanistan over the years. It is the place that kind of shaped, because coming from Guyana and being young and being naive in certain way, even when I was studying at university and I studied the Russian war, the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, there's a certain sense of naivety and, it is black and white and these people are good people and, and then you go and, it shatters everything that you think about how people should behave in crisis or in war or in peace or whatever, and you see nothing that resembles, like, it just completely shattered me in a way that allowed me to mature very quickly as a journalist.
But look, you have a unique achievement, and I am wondering, when I first met you, why you haven't sought funding to write a book. Look, in all the major media houses in this world, but of course, unfortunately, I have to leave out India and the rest of the third world, because we are part of the Western world. But I'm talking about the media houses that influence us and we thought were the definitive media houses. Of all of them, I don't think a Guyanese have achieved that level of recognition by an international media house. And the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation is the Canadian media house. You should, when I read your CV, you should put that experience into a book. You should be able to get funding. You have your Canadian contacts. A man who has been given several awards by the Canadian Institute of Journalists, Canadian Broadcasting Association of Journalists. You should be able to. You should put that into.
I intend to write a book, actually.
Oh, well, good. You're young yet. You're early 60s.
I know, but I intend to write a book. Actually, it's something that's been on my mind, because I think you're right. You're right in that. It's a unique experience, and I was on the front line.
No Guyanese has gone through that, whether it's CBS, ABC, Reuters, Le Monde, The Guardian, the BBC. None of them have been able to do what you have done.
I don't know of any, but I'm taking your word for it.
I don't think for 35 years and going to interview Netanyahu, covering the war in Serbia, almost being killed in Afghanistan, no. And that is why I thought this program would add to Guyana's historiography. We now know that there's a guy called Nazim Baksh who spent 35 years at the leading media organization in Canada, received a number of prestigious Canadian awards, and covered some of the most horrifying spots of war globally. You need to put that in a book. Maybe you should have written that before you came home. Because you're probably very busy in Guyana.
I have my boxes of file. I've kept every notebook that I used while I was at the CBC, going way back to 1991, 92.
But
so I can literally track all my stories that I've worked on. And as a diverse person in Canada, as a Muslim, covering these kinds of stories, comes with its peril. I mean, not everybody's going to like and agree with your perspective, right? And I remember when I went to Afghanistan and I came back and we did the first documentary that we produced was called Seeds of Terror. And it won the Canadian Association of Journalists Award for Best Investigative Show in 1994. So it aired in 1993, so it was qualified to, so it aired in 1994, sorry. The award that came out later that year, the Canadian Association of Journalists, called it the best documentary in 1994. So the airing was in January 1994. And I remember when it came out, there were many people that were angry with me. One of the critical interviews that we had done in that documentary, Seeds of Terror, we looked at how American policy in places like Afghanistan and other places of the world was backfiring on the United States. How foreign policy, goals and objectives were to fund, in particular in Afghanistan, to fund the Mujahideen during its war with Afghanistan, to give them Stinger missiles and so on and so forth. And after the Russians were defeated, what happened to all that weapon that the United States had plowed into Afghanistan? And blowback was a term that was coined around that time to show basically what happens when your policies backfire on you, right? And this is well written and documented in terms of Afghanistan. But one of the people that we wanted to interview was a guy by the name of Mubarak Ali Shah Jilani. And Mubarak Ali Shah Jilani, and this comes back to home. I did not know this at the time. Mubarak Ali Shah Jilani was, he used to live in the United States. He's a Pakistani extremist, violent jihadi. You might remember Daniel Pearl. Daniel Pearl, when he was kidnapped by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, we know now.
Financial Times, he wrote for the Washington Post. Yeah.
When Daniel Pearl from the Washington Post was on his way to go meet Mubarak Ali Shah Jilani in Pakistan, Khalid Sheikh people intervened and kidnapped him. And you know the rest, he was killed and so on and so forth. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed will come back to Guantanamo in a bit, and we'll talk about Guantanamo. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, obviously that happened. I'm just segueing. Go back to the time now. In Toronto, Mubarak Ali Shah Jilani had several followers. In particular, 5 of them were arrested in 1991, plotting to blow up a Hindu temple and an Indian theater in downtown Toronto, in Gerrard Street. Now, if you're familiar with Gerrard Street,
yeah, of course I am.
Used to be a very Indian part of town, right? And you remember the Amitabh Bachchan theater that was there on Gerrard Street? Anyway, they were planning to blow that up, to bomb it, and a Hindu temple, which is, the pandit there is Dubé from Canada. From Guyana, sorry. Mr. Pandit Dubé, or I think his name is.
Guyanese are everywhere, man.
Yeah, Guyanese are everywhere, right? But it's a beautiful, beautiful temple in northern part of Toronto. And anyway, they were arrested and they were caught. They're followers of this Mubarak Ali Shah Jilani. And so I wanted to get an interview with him as well on that same huge trip that we took. We went to Afghanistan, we were in Sudan, we were in Egypt, we were in India, we were in Pakistan. So we went to literally all those countries. And I got the interview with him, not in Pakistan, but in Sudan. And when the interview came out, he had never, by his own admission, he'd never been interviewed by anybody, any Western, Pakistani journalist, Indian journalist, nobody had ever interviewed this guy. He was completely elusive. He was on the FBI most wanted list. And we got an interview. I convinced him to sit down and do a television interview. And he did. And when I came back and we put the documentary together, Seeds of Terror, and it aired, there was a tremendous backlash against me for that interview. obviously we take snippets of interview, we want to show the whole interview. If we had done that interview, let's say 20 years later, the CBC would have aired the full interview, right? They would put the full interview up on whatever CBC channel with Hikmat Yar, with so on. They're still in the archives. I mean, they're still an archive of all of that material. Anyway, so, you know, the point I'm trying to make is that the Muslim community didn't take it lightly that I was exposing these extremists, these radical, violent people within our community that preyed on innocent Muslims, supporting them or acquiescing to them or granting them a favorable heir. They weren't happy with that. And so I had to face a lot of that in the 1990s, this estrangement, this, you know, my parents were always constantly being complained to about me and about what I'm doing at the CBC and so on and so forth. But, you know, Freddie, I held my ground. I believed in what I was doing. Why? Because I understand my religion to be a religion of peace, a religion of love, a religion of simplicity, a religion which I had learned in Guyana, growing up in Guyana, growing up in little madrasas, going to the masjid, going to Old Mosque Masjid, going to Ramvelt Masjid. You know, this is what I'd learned from our elders, that there was a simplicity and a beauty to our religion. And I consider these people to be, you know, imposing a violent rhetoric and a violent ideology.
Embarrassing Islam too. Embarrassing a great
embarrassing
religion.
our Prophet, embarrassing the Quran, embarrassing the vast majority of Muslims who live peaceful
Trump
lives.
said if he gets president, he'll ban Muslims from visiting Guyana. How could you, from visiting USA? How could, if a Hindu group does something, how could you ban all Hindus? If a Turkish group does something, how could you ban all Turkish from the United States? Yeah, they certainly did a number on the great religion.
Yeah. So I don't want to paint a rosy picture only to say, you know, my life and my journalism was all great and hunky-dory. I did all these wonderful things. I did, but it came with a cost, right? And I either was going to believe in what I was standing for and believe in my journalism and stand by it, or, you know, I was going to either have to be sympathetic and acquiesce to an extremist group that I did not believe in, that I don't share an understanding with, that I had nothing in common with. So I choose my path, and that was the path I held to for 35 years.
Do you think, let's look at let's go into some autobiographical notes. Do you think you were favored? You had a godfather at Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, or do you think the white journalists didn't want to venture into those war-torn areas, and they say, let this Muslim boy go?
Well, you know, that's a good question.
But looking back again, I should not ask it, because you have friends in Canada that have retired like you, and they may say, what the hell he's saying there.
No, I don't care. I mean, look, when I was hired, I did an interview with David Bazzi and John Owen. David Bazzi had passed away. John Owen, I think, is still alive. He's a senior journalist in Europe.
Still around?
Still around, yeah. They came to my school. They came to the journalism school, and I put my name on the list. I obviously wanted a job. I didn't just come and study journalism for nothing. I wanted to get employed. I had a family, 2 kids. I needed to have a job. So I put my name on the list. I got interviewed. They asked me, I'm now like fresh from Guyana. I don't know anything. I know a lot. I've read, I went to university and so on. But they said, we're going to ask you some questions about some people and tell us what you know about it. So Roe versus Wade, Roe v. Wade.
Yeah. And I asked you that?
Yeah. And
you didn't know that was the abortion thing?
No, I'm scratching my head. I'm thinking Roe v. Wade. I'm thinking there's something, it got to be a court case, because when you say
when you see verses, yeah.
So, but I'm blind. You know, you doing interviews, right? I'm young. I'm sort of.
You got to write a book.
You know.
Yeah.
And then I said in the interview, but can I ask you a question? The two of them, the two senior, most senior CBC journalists, right? Director and executive producer. And they said, go ahead. I said, there's a case in Egypt called Mubarak versus the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. Do you know anything about the case? And they looked at me and said, no. And I said, yeah. Do you want me to know everything in your white world, your Western world, or do you want me to know something different? And David Baze told a story later, and he said, that was the turning point for you. He called me in his office one day, and he said, during the Gulf War, he said, Nazim, we have 90% of the people in the CBC can cover Canadian politics, Ontario politics, Alberta politics, Quebec separatists. We can do that till the cows come home. There's no one that can do what you can do. So do you want to join the herd, or do you want to make your niche on your own? Do you want to make a new niche?
So he was the godfather then?
He was the godfather.
He has died?
Yeah, he died. He was the only one that when my fourth child was born, I invited him to my akika, my son's akika, the birth celebration at my parents' home. He's the only CBC person that I invited back in those days to my home. And he was a great man. He was a fantastic journalist. He covered Sabra and Shatila. He was in Walking Among the Dead.
He covered that thing in Lebanon when the Israelis have been killing Palestinians for a long time. Most of our Guyanese people
don't know that.
Wouldn't know about that massacre in the Palestinian refugee camp. Those Israelis are
David Baze,
worse than the Nazis, man.
The man who hired me and gave me a break and actually mentored me, walked among the dead. So that was my boss.
No, but you should, Nazim, seriously now, you should put aside some time and write this book.
Yeah.
And the book for one of the most honored Canadian journalists. Your book will have marketability both in Guyana and Canada. I'm sure some of the great journalists of Canada that are now retired at my age, they would read it.
I think it's been inspiration.
5 years?
Yeah, my hope is it'll be inspiration for young journalists coming up as well.
Yeah, you should write that book. I think most people writing a book will need some financial assistance because you have to, you should
take time off to write.
So I am thinking when I read your CV, I'm thinking about the times we talked, and I said to myself, you must have a godfather because the CBC is the definitive Canadian media house, and the competition there have to be great, man.
Yeah,
you have to be great. Even I lived in Canada. At the time when you arrived in Canada, if you had come to the University of Toronto in 1980, you probably would have met me. Plus, I used to demonstrate against Burnham in the streets of Toronto with the WPA. But I know from people in the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, this journalism is always a competitive field. So that guy David did you well.
No.
Now, it was he that sent you to interview Netanyahu?
No, so that came about. When I joined the CBC, there was a lot of cuts at the CBC, budget cuts, because the CBC's public broadcasters get funding from the government. But there's a charter that governs the CBC and that it's hands off. The government cannot control the content of the CBC.
Like the BBC,
Like the BBC.
Yeah, but the UK government have been stripping the BBC of its autonomy for the past 20 years.
Yeah, but they do that with budget cuts, right? I mean, that's how they do it in an underhanded way.
Yeah, budget cuts.
So every year that I've been at the CBC, there were cuts to the CBC. So what happens in a corporation when you are the last in the door and there are cuts? You're the first out, right? You get cut. David Baze saved me. He protected me.
Your godfather.
All these years and years after years, he was like, no, you can't touch him. And he would find special funding for me. So I get to stay on at the CBC. But I gotten cut from the National. I ended up on a show called News World. And Yitzhak Rabin was murdered in 1996 in a square in Tel Aviv. He was shot and killed first prime minister of Israel to be shot and killed by an extremist Jewish man that was extremist Jew, shot him and killed him. How he got that close, I mean, there's books written on it and so on and so forth. We won't get into that. But Netanyahu had come to power right after. Yitzhak Rabin, you might remember, is Labour Party.
Yeah.
Netanyahu is Likud, an extremist party with very, very pro-settler views about Israeli defense. He'd come from being a commando in the Israeli army. This man had been in Washington. He was in the part of the Israeli embassy in Washington. And now he's in power, right? He comes to power. He becomes the prime minister in 1996 to 1999. 1999 happens to be the 50th anniversary of the State of Israel. So my boss at that time was identify outwardly as non-practicing, non-conforming Jewish person. He says to me, calls me in his office, and he says, I want you to prepare 10 shows that we do, 5 on Palestinians, 5 on Israelis, looking at the State of Israel 50 years since the formation of the State of Israel. And then me, you want me to do this thing? It's like, I like, what am I going to do? I'd never been to Israel. You know that. And he says, I'm assigning you to the story. Do you want it or not? And I said, yeah, I'll take it. And he says, we need to get an interview with Benjamin Netanyahu. And I just know my name is going to be like a roadblock, right? So I set about, and that was the hardest interview to get. Well, we knew we weren't going to get Yasser Arafat. So we got Abu Ala, who was the second. He died recently. He liked me a lot. You know, we had, and over the years, some of the leading Palestinian people politicians had come to Canada. And over those years, I'd gotten to meet some of them, right? Hanan Ashrawi, for example, Abu Ala, these kinds of people. So they kind of were familiar with my name because I used to call them often, put them on TV. When they come to Canada, would get chances to interview them and so on, in person. So you got to know them. They got to know you by name, right? Because Nazim Baksh is not a name in Canada you hear a lot. And so, but Netanyahu, I'd never interviewed him. And so what happened was that I called his people and fax, letters, communication, asking for an interview, a sit-down formal interview with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. At that time, nobody had done an interview with Netanyahu in Canada, like none of the major television companies. And in the end, we weren't going to get the interview, it was clear. And out of frustration, I said to his media person, I said, I know exactly what is happening here. And he goes, what do you know exactly that is happening here? Because they have to be polite, because we're the CBC. We're not, run-of-the-mill journalist media house. We are the public broadcaster of Canada on record. We're the media on record. And I said, I know why you don't want to give this interview, because I'm a Muslim and you don't trust me. And we got the interview. That somehow turned the tide the other way. And we got the interview, and
yeah, that's a typical human nature thing. You go to a man and you want something. You say, I don't know. I know why you won't sell me, because I'm Portuguese.
You don't like me. You don't like me for whatever.
So they
reason.
want to prove that you're wrong, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we got the interview, and when we do interviews like with someone as high profile as Benjamin Netanyahu, what we do after breakfast in the morning is we sit down, the director, the host of the show, and the producer, and we hash out the questions, right? And what is the first question? What is the second question? What is the third question? Now, in American television, what people don't know is when you do interviews in America, when you see an interview with a high-profile person, chances are, with some media organization, the person will ask for the first and second or third question. So they know in rapid fire, this is coming first, that's coming second, and that's coming third. All right. Most times that is the normal thing. We don't. We have a policy. We never share questions with our.
The big politicians in the U.S. ask for that.
Yes. Yeah. All these guests.
Don't know that. Are you hearing that, viewers? Are you listening to this, man?
Yeah. Secrets. I'm giving away secrets.
Are you listening to? We in the West, we in Guyana, in the Caribbean, the West of imposed and so many things upon us that to make them look as they are the standard bearer. You hearing what this guy is saying? The big politicians want the questions in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Go on.
So anyway, so we sat down, and the first question that Alison Smith, who did the interview, she said, "What is there to celebrate?" And that was my question. And like a pro, this man is so egotistical. He just went off on the question. And the interview was half an hour. At the end of the interview, he literally got up and walked out of the room. It's done.
That's on film. It's in the archives.
Yeah, CBC it's in our archive.
But you don't have private copy.
I have a private copy.
You have a private copy?
Yeah, on VHS.
Oh, well, we'll have to. If we have you back on this program, are you allowed? To show that thing?
CBC is a public broadcaster.
No, but that's copyright material. Will be shown. You allow?
Yeah,
you
but you can credit it. You can. It's called fair usage. Fair usage is a term that is used that for purposes of edification or understanding or sharing information, you are allowed to use some portions as long as it's attributed to
you have
source.
that in Canada. You brought it here.
It's in Canada.
In Guyana. So that'd be nice to show.
It won an award. It won a bronze award at the New York Festival. It's in my resume as well.
Could we do this another thing in a month or 6 weeks to come and show?
Let me get it first.
Oh yes, it's not in but I wonder after the Gaza war is over and he gets older, because you're pretty young yet, you're much younger than him. I wonder if you would seek an interview with him and say, "Do you know what? I interviewed you on the 50th anniversary of Israel." You think you would risk that?
I won't. I want to interview him. I have no interest in talking to the man. I think he's
personification of evil.
Something like that. I've never felt the kind of negative energy from someone that I felt from him when he came into that room. I mean, a lot of people have told me that he is, he gives them the creeps, so to say. But I did get the creeps. I remember my hair.
Well, let me tell my viewers,
standing up on
the only Guyanese that interviewed a man who is now gone down in history as a war criminal and whose cruelty parallels the Nazi murderers of the Jews. Benjamin Netanyahu, our guest here, Nazim Baksh, interviewed him, and he has a copy of that interview, which one day we will show you. But he would not. You don't want to interview him, and I don't think he will give you an interview. He probably want to check on you because we did a program with the Jordanian Palestinians, and the Jordanian Palestinian woman living in Guyana was born in Jordan, and the Jordanian government got in her case and told her to remove that interview from the net. So her people called and say, "You're going to endanger her when she goes to Jordan. Remove it from the net."
Yeah.
I am sure embassies here have shown your two interviews in which you talk about Israel and Netanyahu.
Yeah, but
the Israeli government have those.
I am only
interviews.
speaking. I'm only speaking.
Don't believe the Israeli government.
I'm only speaking what's fact. I'm not making anything up.
Did he make your skin grow?
Yeah, I think so. Something like that, we would say. In Guyana.
So you just know this was not a right man for Israel. This is not a right man to be.
Well, remember, this is 1999, right? So, he's come and gone. And, 2009, he took over as prime minister again. He lasted until, 2021, 2020? Or
when the coalition fell apart.
Yeah, when it fell apart. And then he rebuilt the coalition. I mean, he's survived a long political career. And you don't do stuff like that.
I don't think he could survive the post-war period in Gaza.
Maybe he doesn't want to. What's unfolding now is quite bizarre. As people are following the events that happened yesterday and today.
In Lebanon with the
pagers and today the walkie-talkies. Dozens of people have lost their lives and thousands have been injured. It's quite unfortunate that we see this happening. My heart goes out. One of my religious teachers actually is a Lebanese from Canada. who lives in the United States now. We obviously, in Canada being a cosmopolitan, sort of multicultural country, everybody comes from somewhere. And the Muslim community, obviously, we have a large Lebanese community in Canada, in Alberta and in Ontario. So, but I wanted to before our time runs out, to talk about Guantanamo.
I was coming to that. Yeah,
because
we have 10 minutes now.
So Guantanamo, the U.S. prison in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The history.
But that would have been a position at CBC, which people would have wanted to go there.
Yeah, but
your godfather stepped in there again.
But I had no godfather at that time. But I had a bit of history, because one of the youngest prisoner at Guantanamo was a Canadian by the name of Umar Khadr. And I had established a niche on the Khadr family. Like, I became the resident expert on all things Khadr. This was a family, Egyptian family, that had come to Canada way back in the 80s. Married a family that was already established in Toronto. And Ahmad Said Khadr, when the war in Afghanistan was going on in the 80s, he had gone to Afghanistan to do relief work. But he ended up getting pulled into the Mujahideen. And subsequent to that, the Al-Qaeda, the formation or the loose formation of Al-Qaeda. When it was formed in the 1990s and established as an organization, he became a part of that. And he, according to many, many documents that I've read, the Americans and the Canadians believe that he was number 5 in the hierarchy of Al-Qaeda, with Osama bin Laden being the top, him being 5 or 6. So his children, his son, Umar Khadr, is his son. So Umar Khadr was captured in Afghanistan, taken to Bagram, injured, he was shot, taken to Bagram Air Base, where he was tortured. We know this for a fact now. And he was then moved to Guantanamo. And in Guantanamo, he's the youngest prisoner in Guantanamo. There's 700 and close to 800 total at max time, 800 prisoners at Guantanamo. As of January this year, it's down to 20.
What happened to the rest? Other countries have taken them?
They've gotten released back to their countries and other countries and so on and so forth. There's only one conviction out of Guantanamo. So 20 prisoners. So Umar Khadr is there, and it's now 2008, and the Toronto Star, Michelle Shepard, one of my colleagues, wonderful journalist, she wanted to write a book on Umar Khadr and the Khadr family.
They just have the man, and they just have these people there without charges.
Without thing. But it's a military.
I am so glad that we have more superpowers in the world than this unipolar world in which United States is coterminous with the world.
Yeah.
Every day I just hope China gets bigger and more influential.
Well, anyway, so in 2008, I asked to go to Guantanamo and was granted permission to go. The way we get to Guantanamo is you don't take a commercial flight. You go to Andrews Air Base in Washington, outside of Washington, and you take a military flight to Guantanamo. And basically you're there.
But the Americans, let me cut you because this is important for the program. When you were selected, the Americans, you would know because maybe your bosses never told you. You think the Americans said, but why are you sending a Muslim man? You think they told CBC that?
There were actually 3 of us that were there on a country. One of them, our camera guy, his name is Usama.
Well, you think they contacted the Canadians and say, why are you sending these Muslims? You would know that, right?
I mean, I wouldn't know. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have.
But what was their reaction?
I mean, it was bizarre. It was as a prison. And you're literally there, and you have your bunker where they give you a bunker to sleep in, and a washroom, and you can only move between the media center, this bunker, and back and forth. You can go eat, but they take you to eat, and they pick you back up. And so you're never on your own at this military base with barbed wire, snipers everywhere, and all of that kind of stuff. And you're on the other side of a hill, so the prisoners are on one side, you're on the other side. And if you want to go see them, they arrange a trip where they take you in these golf carts, and you literally are not allowed with cameras, but you can go. And you get to go to court. Well, the court, whatever they call a court, is a tribunal. And so when I was there, the few times we were there for Umar Khader, but not every day he comes up. He might come up one day in the week, and the other days, other prisoners will come up. So we would go to court because nothing else to do. Observe what's going on with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, for example, who's on death sentence.
Who's we? It's CBC people and who else?
Journalists from around the world.
Around the world?
Yeah, Miami Herald,
Los Angeles Times.
Those kinds of people.
Toronto
Reuters,
Star and Global Mail were...
Toronto Star was there. Global Mail, I'm not sure.
Okay.
They were not there with me when I was there, the times when I was there. I went in 4 times and came out. But we ended up doing a documentary on Umar Khader, where we recreated the battle that took place when he was injured. Because the Americans were claiming that he threw a grenade that killed a U.S. Army officer and injured another one. He lost his eye. And so what we tried to do was we looked at the actual evidence and what they wrote, what the report was, where the fighting was, and we recreated the compound where the fighting happened. We did it in Montreal, outside of Montreal in Quebec. We actually created a war zone, and we hired military guys to come in and do the explosion and everything. And what we were able to show in a 1-hour documentary called United States versus Umar Khader, that Umar Khader could not have thrown a grenade after he was shot. It was impossible. He was a frail 14-year-old boy that was on an unfortunate situation. He could not have done that. In the end, the Canadian government had to settle the case because it knew that Umar Khader was being tortured in Guantanamo, and it never did anything to help this Canadian citizen. He was born in Canada, right? To get back to Canada.
Western freedom.
So when he was eventually released and he rehabilitated in Canada, he ended up suing. His lawyer was Dennis Edney. They sued the Canadian government, and the government settled for $10.5 million. So Umar Khader is now a millionaire in Canada. But nobody wanted to hear this story. Nobody wanted to hear my story. Nobody wanted me to, my bosses were telling me at that time, why are you bothered with Umar Khader? Right? He's a bad egg. Just, you're wasting your time. Canadians don't care. Nobody cares about him. And we'd say, no, we got to do this story. We got to do this story. We got to do this story. We persisted and kept doing the story. Knew all the lawyers, all the American lawyers that defended him, William Kibler, all of these people helped us. I, in fact, was the first person to write 6 questions on a piece of paper and had it smuggled into Umar Khader, and he responded in writing to my 6 questions. And it's part of the documentaries that I did.
You haven't visited him recently? I know you were in Canada recently.
We talked on the phone. He lives in Alberta. I'm from Ontario.
Oh yeah, that's very far.
Yeah.
But he is aware that you have championed his case.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. He knew. He saw the documentary. He said my lawyers showed it to me when I was in prison in Guantanamo.
But how you smuggled that?
Years.
You smuggled those questions to him, and
through his lawyer. His lawyer helped me.
Oh, but the Americans didn't.
If they did, it was not allowed.
How you managed that?
It wasn't allowed, but I didn't go back to Guantanamo after that.
But wouldn't they have had cameras?
Yeah, they searched the lawyers before they go in. This was an American lawyer. William Kibler is an American military lawyer because it's a military tribunal, so only military can represent.
I have to wrap up when this program is over. We've got a minute more, and I'm wondering what I should say in wrapping up. I mean, we haven't had in a long time in local media someone with your background and your experience, and I think you're doing a disservice to Guyana's historiography by not writing a book on. I think you are. I mean, you have achieved in journalism what no other Caribbean person has done. I don't think there's a Trinidadian Jamaican that have been at that level of a major Western news media house.
For that long. I'm not sure.
35 years, right? And you worked, I mean, it's to be at Guantanamo 4 times to cover the massacre in Bosnia. I mean, to interview, you definitely have.
We haven't even talked about my last 6 documentaries that I did for the CBC, but before my retirement.
our time has come. Operator signaling we have 1 minute more. But Nazim, you've chosen not to bask in the limelight of Canada as you get older. You have chosen not to live in the Western world. I guess home is where the heart is.
Home is where the heart is. I love Guyana. It's my country. And I am enjoying my time here. I miss Canada, but my time is here in Guyana.
Yeah, well, if you live so long in Canada and Canada made you what you are, I guess in your heydays, you were a known person in the media, yeah. all of the media people. But did you ever feel, have you ever felt in the media that some of the Western journalists had this Muslim thing about you?
Yeah. I mean, I always felt that.
He's a Muslim, who's this Muslim guy?
Yeah, there was a sense of suspicion, doubt. You know, in the early days, I used to say I was pro-Palestinian until I learned better that that's not a good thing to say. People kind of like judge you the wrong way, and, you know, it makes you seem like you're biased from the get-go. But I would say I encountered a lot of bias, nothing that alarmed me, nothing that, you know, fazed me. I just kept my head down and did my work. I had my life, my family, my parents, my brother, my sisters, my community, and I always stayed attached to my community.
Did you so when you were in Canada throughout your 35 years at CBC, you didn't neglect your roots, especially.
No.
You were would you say you were integrated in a Muslim community?
I'm very integrated, and also I used to come back to Guyana very often, almost once a year. Every 2 years or 3 years, I'd be home for holidays and keep my connection here to Guyana.
Well, you what time frame you have for writing this book?
I would say, you know, I'm having my material, my files shipped to me. So when that gets here, I'll sit down, calm and clear-minded, and decide on a strategy and what I want to write about, and what I think could be a meaningful contribution to upcoming journalists.
The title will be important.
I have a title already. The
title will be important because you have to say something in the title that will catch the eyes of the Canadian people, and of course the Guyanese people. So, a Guyanese boy in the Canadian media.
No, so I wouldn't be a boy.
Well, the boy doesn't mean boy has an extended meaning. When people say I'm a working class boy, 70 to 75-year-old people say I'm a working class boy. I say I'm in my early 70s, and I say I've always been a working class boy.
I did a talk at I did a talk at Yale University, and the title of the talk was the title I'd like to use for the book, which is Jihad in the Newsroom. It's a double entendre. It means my own personal struggle, but jihad is a subject.
So what about my personal jihad in journalism?
Yeah, but that's not a double entendre. Jihad could mean a subject of jihad. Yeah. Like back in the day, the Mujahideen who were doing jihad in Afghanistan against the Russians were friends with Americans. But Hezbollah is an enemy.
Well, my operators have just said they're going to do a jihad against you because we're 2 minutes over time. So, right. Nazim, we have to do this again, and we have to show the Benjamin Netanyahu thing. I don't know how I'm going to sum up here, but here I'm going to sum up now. Our guest this evening has been a unique Guyanese in his achievement in journalism. And I would go so far to say no Caribbean journalist has excelled the way Nazim Baksh of Guyana has. For 35 years, a journalist with the Canadian Broadcasting Association and recipient of some of the great national awards in journalism of Canada. After 35 years, he's retired. He's back in Guyana, and he'll be writing a book that surely will be interesting to all of those who knew him in Canada and those who now know him in Guyana. We're over time so quickly. Thanks, Naim. Catch you later. Bye-bye.